Welcome back, baseball fans, to another installment of the 1971-74 off-season for keepers, waivers, and retires. This is the third installment as the league tries to get to a beginning point for next year, and we've done it. We've gotten to a point where the league could start. Doesn't mean the rosters will look like this prior to the draft, because you can just still have trades in the off season. We're really early into this process, and it's kind of fun to spend the winter months and consider the hot stove league trades. But for right now, it's about each team following the guidelines to get the correct number of keepers, waivers, and retires. We established that the league of 32 teams, you need to get to 128 keepers and 64 guys on waivers and retirement. We started this process with an abundance of players who wanted to be kept, and the teams wanted to dangle them in trades, and most of the time there wasn't a trade partner, so those keepers became waivered players. So that means that's good. That means that these guys can look for a team that really wants them, it was about 19 players moved from the keeper class to the waiver class, and just 3 more players added to retirement from the 61 to get to the 64. We stopped last time with the Twins, team 24 in the draft, to get to comport to 402 and 02. So let's begin now by beginning with the 25th through 32 teams to wrap this up. The Cleveland Indians. We're going to first start where their season ended with Cleveland and see exactly. It was Ray Fosse, Eddie Leone, Vada Pinson, and Frank Robinson were your keepers. Larry Brown, Steve Hargan on waivers, Tony Horton and Danny Walton being retired. And when it was all said and done, they didn't do a lot of movement here. It's still Fosse, Leone, Pinson, Robinson, Brown, Hargan, Horton, and Walton. They didn't make a move, but they feel pretty bullish. They're going to have one more year of Fosse before he goes to Oakland. Eddie Leone becomes a 2 defensive player, and they like that. And Pinson and Robinson are just going to play as long as they can there. And Robinson actually, of course, does play for the Indians in '74. So they're going to try and keep these guys together and hope that they can pick up where they left off a year ago when they went into the playoffs. Surprise playoff team. Also, as we look at the list here, this is the won and loss column, and Cleveland is picking 25th, and their record is 25 and 26. And you're going, why are they picking so low on the list that they had a losing record? Well, they won in the division, and then they won a playoff series in the wild card round. So that puts you into this group here, teams that lost in the divisional round, and frankly, Cleveland would lose to the Oakland A's. So it's not like they were eliminated by a cupcake there. So Cleveland has comported to 40202. Next up, let's look at Houston. The Astros had a really tough start last year. Then they went on a tear and even fought to the end against the Reds, down 0-3. They would fight back and lose 4-2. They started perfectly with Duncan, Mankey, Morgan, and Wynn. And of course, they're going to get the Morgan card of 71. So last year's with Houston before the eventual trade happens to the Reds. And we're going to kind of let history at least move Morgan in the appropriate year, though the compensation might be different. McCraw, Merritt on waivers, Ron Cook, and Goosen on retirement list. Did Houston do anything dramatic in this round? And the answer is no. They have Duncan and Mankey and Morgan and Wynn and McCraw and Merritt and Cook and Goosen. So the 2 teams, Cleveland and Cleveland and Houston, stood pat at 40202, and it happens sometimes. There's not enough information or players out there that want you to change your mind from the 4 guys you want to keep and the 2 you want to waive and 2 you retire. A team that did make plenty of moves is Boston. The Red Sox started this process with 5 keepers and 3 retired players and got to the proper math by making some deals. And we'll look at those deals. Let's see where we started first. Boston keeping Tommy Harper, Rico Petrocelli, Reggie Smith, Carl Yastrzemski, and Marty Patton. They have to get rid of one of these guys, and they're all good, and they all have connections to Boston. So I don't think you would, and of course the Red Sox would not simply put a guy, any of these talented players on waivers because they're too good. You don't just waive Tommy Harper or Rico Petrocelli and put them on waivers. There's no way. You got to make a deal. And so, boy, there were deals being made. Let's go through what Boston has done to revamp their team, transitioning 70, 71, 72, and 73 to 71, 2, 3, and 4. A lot of moving pieces here. These are the transactions we have seen. Going down through Texas, and then the Dodgers and Cardinals, and Dodgers in Las Vegas, Detroit and Vegas. Vegas getting a defensive shortstop and Ed Brinkman. And then Toronto getting a retired player here. Atlanta sending Felix Millan to Florida to make room for Davey Johnson. But here is trade number 1 of several trades the Red Sox made. This one with the Cardinals. This is a wild and fun trade. 4 important players involved in this one. So we have a little bit of history in that Rick Wise and Reggie Smith are in this trade. The rest of the trade is not. It's a new trade. So Reggie Smith, the Red Sox decided that they have so many outfielders in their system. They've got Rick Miller, they've got Dwight Evans, they'll soon have Freddie Lynn, Jim Rice, that they're willing to move Reggie Smith. And the Cardinals want to get him because the Cardinals want to have to do something to catch up to the Cincinnati Reds and the Pirates in their division. So the principals, Wise, and Smith are in there. The color scheme, green, means an active player. He's actually on the roster with Rick Wise's 71 card. And so to balance out the trade, the Red Sox would send their ace of the last 3 years, Sonny Siebert, their ace of the Red Sox. And the reason they send him in this trade is that Rick Wise will have a longer period of success coming forward than Siebert. After 1971, Siebert will start to travel around the league a little bit and be near the end of his career. Wise will have a nice little string. He'll pitch all the way through 1980, but he'll begin a nice little career of pitching on 3 days rest. And so he becomes the Red Sox. He might not elevate to a number 1 where Siebert was, but the Red Sox have Bill Lee and Louis Tiant, so they're not really concerned with Rick Wise needing to be the stopper. The key piece here is a very cool Ted Abernathy, an older reliever who played a long career to Ted Abernathy, but he has very excellent years in the years of 1971 and 72 with Kansas City. Boston demanded him in the deal, and Boston also gets a draft token because Reggie Smith is the best player here. So I kind of like what the Red Sox have done. They knew Siebert was running out of a career, so he was replaced. Reggie Smith just doesn't have a long career here either. They get a draft choice for that, and they get to solidify their bullpen with Abernathy. In the short term, the Cardinals go sideways with the pitching. They don't care. They still have Bob Gibson at the top, so Sonny Siebert as a 2 is one of the best 2s in all of the league next year, and they got Reggie Smith. Now they got a guy to build this offense around in St. Louis. So that's a great trade for both teams, really. And Boston wasn't done. After that, they sent Marty Patton because they didn't have room in their rotation anymore because they were going to move Roger Moret back into the rotation where he was so good 2 years ago. So they sent Marty Patton to Kansas City for a retired Bob Veal, who incidentally comes out of retirement. He misses, I think, 71. He doesn't have a card. But he has a card for Boston as a reliever in 73. But in any event, Boston doesn't care. They'll just leave them on retirement list for now. If Boston doesn't get Bob Veal, pull him out of retirement. It's not a big deal to them. But they get another token. So they picked up 2 draft tokens through the Red Sox, and they moved their rotation around in a nice manner. Another inconsequential deal is that Boston moved Veal to the Expos to get a waivered player so they could comport to the proper number of 4, 2, and 2. And then they sent Gary Wagner to create a spot for Ted Abernathy. Wagner closed games out last year, so he was sent to Detroit for Howie Reed, who will go on waivers. These 2 players, by the way, both were on the Tigers a year ago. Kane was sent to the Expos earlier in the draft carousel, and the Red Sox are just going to put them both on waivers. So what does this mean now for Boston? With the what does their roster look like now? I think it looks pretty good. So Boston, they're going to bring back Tommy Harper in the outfield. Petrocelli will be a third baseman. The third baseman, Kennedy, can move to short for the time being. They still have Tom Griffin playing second base, and they still have Doug Griffin playing second base, and they still have Mike Andrews. So they have enough infielders. And they have Yaz. We know he could play first or left. So you're going to have Tommy Harper and Yaz. But you also have, again, you have Rick Miller and Dwight Evans waiting to be called up. And then you have Abernathy now closing out games. And in the rotation, you still have Rick Wise, Bill Lee, Louis Tiant, and your number 4 starter will be Roger Moret or John Curtis. Curtis and Moret are both starter 7s. So it's really a good situation. Boston has plenty of starting pitching. They got 5 starters. They got a good reliever in Abernathy. Bolin is still a decent reliever. And all they have to do is get one more relief pitcher for the draft. They're going to open up the draft with 1 lefty in Lee, another lefty in John Curtis, another lefty in Roger Moret. So all you need is a right-handed pitcher. That's the easiest thing for a team to find. Just somebody to throw with his right arm. Not hard to do. So that's a pretty neat, cool way for Boston to comport to 40202 while also competing for the World Series in a division with Baltimore and the Yankees. Now the Dodgers, well, it wasn't very glamorous, and frankly, they simply started this process with the extra guys of Wes Parker was one of them, and the other guy was, let's take a peek again here, the Dodgers. Yeah, it was Wes Parker and Ted Sizemore. And we discussed those trades in a previous video, trading Wes Parker and Sizemore while keeping Tom Haller, a good catcher, left-handed hitting catcher with some power. Andy Messersmith and Claude Osteen will actually have better years, which is great news, joining Sutton and John. And Mickelson still has one more good year left. And so all they really did to comport now is just in making those deals, they got to the proper 40202. Same keepers, Haller, Messersmith, Osteen, Mickelson. They get Julian Javier in the Cardinal deal, put him on waivers. They get Art Shamsky that they can retire from Vegas, and they get a token for giving Vegas slick fielding first baseman Wes Parker. That's a good, I mean, Wes Parker was going to have to be moved. We know he played his whole career with the Dodgers, but there was just no way that Wes Parker and Steve Garvey could coexist, particularly when Steve Garvey's going to win the MVP in 1974, which is next year. So that card will most likely be upgraded for the Dodgers. Next up, the White Sox, and they did all their moves early to get to the 40202. Nothing new here, and they kind of like what their offseason is going to be. Aparicio, they're not trading him. They could have traded him to the Red Sox, but the Red Sox made a bunch of other moves. So they're holding on to Aparicio. He's still going to be a rangy 2 in 71. His average is going to dip. Egan's good enough as a catcher. Ken Henderson and Jack Aker, the 2 big additions to solidify the outfield defense. And also, the White Sox are going to have some of Ken Henderson's giant years to consider in 71 and 72. So they have 4 years of performance for Ken Henderson to consider in this process, not just 1 year. Jack Aker is coming into the bullpen. He will be a fine closer or setup guy for the team. They're also going to upgrade their second base position and maybe the shortstop position with guys like George Orta and Bucky Dent. So the White Sox are going to try and get right back where they were in the League Championship Series and win the division. They're going to try their best to do that. All right, the Mets. They started at 50201 and they only had to do one thing. When they started this process, this is very similar to last year, except they didn't win the World Series. They went not quite as far, but they dominated again in the National League. Last year, they had 5 guys they wanted to keep, and they had to surrender Tommy A.G. This year, they have 5 guys they want to keep. Clendenon, Wayne Garrett, Jerry Grody, Willie Mays, Gary Gentry. They're keeping Mays, of course, because he's going to have one more outstanding year in 71. They're keeping Gentry because he pitches on 3 days rest. Of course, they're keeping Grody. It came down to Garrett and Clendenon. Who do you keep, and who has more life left in them? They selected that Garrett would be their guy, a left-handed hitting guy who walks, hits with power, could play second or third, more versatility than Don Clendenon, who is the odd man out. And who is the partner? Who do they trade with? Who did they trade with last year? Let's take a peek. The Mets found their old friends, the Toronto Blue Jays, and they sent Don Clendenon to the same team that they sent Tommy A.G. to a year ago. So Don Clendenon joins his former Met teammate Tommy A.G. in Toronto, and the Mets are just going to form a bond with the Toronto Blue Jays, and the reason is they want to put all their talented guys on an American League East team that hopefully will beat up on the Orioles, Red Sox, and Yankees. So they get a retiring Terry Crowley, who actually isn't retiring. He's just on and off throughout this decade as a pinch hitter. And some years Strat-O-Matic doesn't print his card. They didn't do it in 71, so he's going to be on retirement. They'll probably come out of retirement in 72, 3, or 4. The Mets pick up another token just like they did last year for Don Clendenon. So that'll help the Blue Jays. We can take a look at them real quickly and see what the Blue Jays kind of look like now after Clendenon is added to the chase. So Tommy A.G. and Clendenon are both keepers, and they're going to select their 71 cards. And then Klimkowski and Darrell Chaney are also just marginal keepers at this point. That single trade enabled the Mets to comport to the proper 40202, which leaves us at the 2 teams in the World Series, Oakland and the Cincinnati Reds. Oakland started this process. They acquired at 3005. They made a deal with Philadelphia to get Orlando Cepeda. That got them to 4 keepers and 4 retirees. And then after that, they would trade Donaldson to Atlanta to swap out a retired player for a waived player. And Oakland comports, which leaves us with the Cincinnati Reds, the last team, a team that, was trying to dangle players, but, teams are scared to deal with Cincinnati. I mean, would you want to be the team that sends, a stud ace or number 2 starter to Cincinnati, which would enable them to, walk away with Strat-O-Matic for the next decade? So they started with Bench, Carbo, Perez, Rose, Tolan, and Bosman. Evaluating this, Tolan misses 71, but he's got a great year in 72. He's going to be kept. He's the last of the keepers. Of course, you're going to have Bench in his MVP of 72. You're going to have Perez in either 71, 3, or 4. And in Rose, I'm going to put another comment here. We still might be ignoring his 73 MVP year because he's got more power in 1971. So it is obviously Bench, Perez, Pete Rose, Bobby Tolan, which leaves Bernie Carbo and Dick Bosman out there. And you'd think Bernie Carbo and Dick Bosman would get a lot of interest. However, What Bernie Carbo just did in 70 does not happen again. He becomes more of a part-time player. And he has some hot years in the later part of the decade, but in 72, 3, 4, not so much. So he would become a trade piece. And Dick Bosman doesn't pitch on 3 days rest ever again, and he would become a trade piece. So the trade the Reds made, they sent Bernie Carbo to Portland, who could always use a quality player, of course. So this is good news for Portland. And you see the expansion division teams are always trying to add pieces. Let's go all the way back to the top, starting with the first time we see Arizona or Colorado or Las Vegas. So Arizona, that's just an inconsequential deal. But they did get Merv Retman. So Arizona gets Merv Retman hitting .319. That's going to help them a lot. Vegas gets Wes Parker. Not that much of a hitter as Retman, but at least he is a great Gold Glove caliber first baseman. And they also got Ed Brinkman with his glove at shortstop. And then the Marlin expansion team gets Felix Millan, who had a magnificent year. And then the next expansion team is Portland, getting Bernie Carbo from the Reds. They just got to find the right year and the right platoon. And that's what you get with Bernie Carbo. He's like lightning in a bottle. In 1 out of every 4 years, Carbo probably has just 1 year where he has plenty of power and on base, and it does it just against right-handed pitching. And that's good enough. It's also good enough for the Reds to get a draft token for Bernie Carbo from an expansion team. And then it turns out the carousel ended with no takers for Dick Bosman. The Reds called their World Series rival, the Oakland A's, saying, well, we know he pitches for you later in the decade. You want Dick Bosman? And the A's said, yeah, we have to get rid of a retired player. So these two guys played in the World Series. Cal Kuntz, his career is over. He actually played with Boston in 1970, though Oakland acquired him in a trade. Dick Bosman is property now of Oakland. They're going to put him on waivers because they don't need him, because they don't have room for him on their keeper list. Again, let's take a look at Oakland and Cincinnati when we're all done. So Oakland, when we're all done, is right here. And you see Bando, Campaneris, and Tennis were the high priorities. And the big offseason trade was getting Orlando Cepeda, who still has some legs at first base and can be a DH, has some walks, really kind of fits into what the Oakland A's like. He takes over the DH platoon that Jim French had. Gene Tennis also DH'd a lot last year. Gene Tennis won't DH in the future. He'll be a catcher, and they'll just find a backup catcher for him. So Orlando Cepeda was the big pickup for the A's. They waived. They ended up getting Gil Gerardo as a waivered player through Atlanta and Dick Bosman. And then Cincinnati, we mentioned their big four. And they're all hitters, of course. Bench, Perez, Rose, and Tolan. The pitching is pretty simple. They have a retired number 2 starter. So it's the same situation it was a year ago. Dick Bosman is one and done. But what did he do? He helped them win a World Series. I'd take that in a heartbeat. You know, you bring in a number 2 starter behind Gullett, you win a World Series. So that's what the job is. And maybe they find that guy in their farm system. Or maybe they deal for Jack Billingham early. Or they deal for Clay Kirby. But they're going to have to find a number 2 starter. Actually, Gary Nolan will be elevated to a 2. Grimsley probably elevated to a 3. And this will probably be a number 4 starter that the Reds get. And that is the 40202. Every team now, the math is all correct, and they've all computed to 40202 just by scrolling over into that column. When you add that math up, you get the number 1286464. And then these are all the tokens involved in the deals. There was a total of two token trades. Philadelphia got 2 tokens in the move of Orlando Cepeda to Oakland. So that was expensive for the A's, but the A's are wealthy since they're in their dynasty era. And the Rangers got 2 tokens moving Merv Retman, who has an incredible year for Baltimore in '71. They got that money from the, should have been the Arizona team, right here, yeah. And then there was a dozen single token trades. So now every team starts the draft with 5 tokens. You see all the pluses and minuses here. And we keep doing this. We keep using these tokens throughout the offseason and during the draft itself to come up with an ultimate waiver list. Right now, 7 is a high, but there's even a higher number. It is Texas, has 8 tokens. You don't want to have too many because you'll be wasting that money. You'll just have money left over and nothing to spend it on. But right now, Texas has 8 draft tokens. And of course, Vegas is down to 3 because they went after Ed Brinkman and they went after Wes Parker. You also see Oakland down to 3 because they went after Orlando Cepeda. There's a big fish in that Oakland lineup. And once these are sorted, the teams with the most tokens are the ones that get to make the first moves for undrafted free agents during the draft. And that's it for keeping, waiving, and retiring at this process. And we'll begin, of course, with more looks at the data, actual transactions from baseballreference.com and the timeline that we might want to use. Looking at more Strat-O-Matic cards in the era, take a peek at who's coming in the new year of '74. Thanks for checking out this series. We'll see you next time.